quick time check for you. 7:38 and a half is our time here on Sky 99.5 FM. More news making in this, the second hour of the Breakfast Roundtable for today, Tuesday, February 21st, 2017. On the line with us now, Senior Attorney at Law and member of the Police Service Commission, Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jessamy. Good morning,
George.
Dr. Ian. Good morning, Edison. And good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Your Honor, good morning.
Yes, Martin George, a couple things. Apart from the presser by the police commissioner yesterday, even before that, we had the police shootings over the weekend and the announcement by the PCA that they're going to be digging into those shootings to make sure that the police were in the right and they did not abuse their authority or use extreme force in discharging their duties. And I'm just thinking about what happened with regard to a couple of those shootings. It was a situation where the police they were on an exercise, and they met opposition by people in the neighborhood or by the person for whom they were searching. And they responded to that opposition that they encountered. There are some who feel that the police has no right doing their job and going about executing their duties, and that's why they oppose them. But the reality is that the police have a job to do, and they have authority given to them by the Constitution to execute those duties. And many times, more often than not, when we see, something funny happening with a police shooting, is because the police are trying to do their job, and they meet opposition, and they have to respond to that. Can I get your thoughts, please?
Well, Jessamy, first of all, I think that it's a rather interesting choice of words you use in there when you speak about the police executing their jobs, because I think the allegation by the family is that the police actually executed their loved
their family
one.
member,
so,
yes.
It's a curious coincidence in that regard. But separate and apart from that, I don't know what were the particular facts of this matter, in the sense you say that the police encountered opposition. I don't know what was the level of opposition they encountered. And you see, the thing is, Jessamy, when you talk about reasonable force, you have to look at what threat you were met with and what was your reaction, because it's always measured that way. One case in particular I can, draw to mind immediately would be the international school shooting. If you recall the incident that occurred some years ago, where a young man went home, took his father's revolver and went back down into the international school and started shooting. As he entered the compound, he shot at the guard, then he went to the cafeteria, he fired some more shots, then he went up to a classroom and he holed himself up inside there with some teachers and students as hostages. And when the police came, he fired shots at them. Now, the very interesting thing about that matter is that there was the allegation by the young man's family, the shooter's family, that the police used excessive force because the police were armed with their automatic rifles and their semi-automatic guns, and they responded when he shot at them. Now, the point is, in such a circumstance, it's very difficult to make out a case for excessive force, and of course, understandably, the claim of the young man's family that there was excessive force, that failed entirely, and the police officers were exonerated. But the circumstances would always determine how you assess and analyze the situation. In other words, take for instance the Trayvon Martin situation. I mean, that wasn't a police-involved situation, but just to give as an example, because remember that was a vigilante situation, right?
Yes.
Where by the young man, they said it's a candy bar he went to purchase, and he had the candy bar in his pocket, and the guy, he was shot, just reaching for his candy bar. So, it's a circumstance that you always have to measure and, assess it. If you think of Tamir Rice in the U.S., the young teenager, again, was it justifiable? Were the police justified in using that kind of force there? We've had examples in Trinidad and Tobago. Remember the officers who were charged in relation to the killing of the person down in, I think it's Mayaro.
Yes.
And they
Three
are before the
officers.
courts now. That's right. They are before the courts now. Then remember we had a shooting in relation to something that occurred up in, I think it's Paramin, somewhere up there. And they again, you had officers before the court. So the point is, it's not always a scenario that you can say, well, look, I am justified in using deadly force because I felt threatened. It has to be reasonably ascertained in the circumstances that you were actually facing some kind of threat.
Now, Mr. George, wasn't the body camera introduced as part of the police arsenal within recent times? If they're going out on these exercises, I thought, if I could, you can correct me because you're on the Police Service Commission. You probably be more informed. Didn't I hear Mr. Seal said that it was first on a trial basis, but I think by now they should have a full complement of these body cams, so we would have had the actual recording. And then what about the pepper spray and the Kaiser gun that we heard about? And we heard the commissioner talking about he's going to do this and do that. What about these armaments that should have been introduced into the police arsenal when they're going out on exercises like this? And if that was the camera was there, or why didn't they have the camera?
Okay, the thing is, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know if the body cams are in official use yet. I know there was the trial run and talk about trying to introduce it officially. I'm not sure yet that it has been officially introduced. Secondly, it doesn't appear in this circumstance that there was any question of anyone having a body cam, so therefore we don't have the benefit of that evidence. Thirdly, in relation to the alternative methods, I fully agree with you in terms of the use of a taser or pepper spray. There are many other alternatives to using deadly force. I have had personally, quite frankly, a difficulty when you see so many of our police officers. I mean, sometimes you see in a simple crowd control situation where normal civilians, they may be even at a party or a fete or whatever, and there's a police presence. You see these extremely heavily armed officers with these big long guns, and I'm thinking, what on earth are you going to do with that? Okay, if for instance something happens, what are you going to do? Start shooting with that huge long SLR weapon into a crowd? That could not be your first option. So I am certainly very much in favor of the police having alternative methods. The tasers, the pepper spray, whatever, the tear gas, all those things. I am very much in favor of those because anything that tends to favor saving a life as opposed to losing a life, I am always a great advocate of it.
Mr. George, the police service and the commissioner have embarked on these religious services, the interfaith services, and so on.
No, sorry. Let's just clarify. The police service.
Yes.
Not the commission.
Well, the commissioner and the service itself. And now of course, we can never disparage the intervention of the divine and so on. But do you feel the things that the commissioner is saying and so on, that really he and the rest of the service are at the end of the tether and they really don't know what more to say?
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't say resorting to divine intervention or divine assistance means that you are at the end of your tether. What I would say, though, is that certainly I am not going to say that I am staffing, outfitting, and paying a police service for them to say, well, look, their solution to crime is that they're going to pray. I rather leave that to pastors and religious persons who are more trained and more skilled in that area. So while I have no difficulty with the police, I guess, having interfaith services, I certainly don't want to see them linking it in any way as part of their solution in the fight against crime. That's not what we paid you and hired you as. We didn't pay you and hire you as a praying police or a preacher police. You are there to enforce the law and to use intelligence strategies and techniques and, evidence gathering. That's what your job is. Your job is not to go and be praying and preaching and, pontificating, So as I say, I have no difficulty with you participating in an interfaith service. But please do not ever come and tell me that that's part of your solution to the war against crime, because I will reject that entirely.
Martin George, something else coming out of that presser with the police commissioner yesterday, his commentary on the shooting that happened in Laventille over the weekend. And he expressed concern that so much of the groundwork that they would have laid over the past few months with the citizens in that area would have been eroded because of the shooting incident that took place. And for me, I understand him expressing that and wanting to assuage the concerns of the community and expressing, regret that the shooting did happen. But I also would have liked to hear him remind everyone that the police have a job to do, that they have the authority in the Constitution to do it, and that when they are going about their duties, what citizens are supposed to do is step aside and let them do their job rather than mob them and attack them and threaten them. A few thoughts from you?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's always a fine line between gaining the trust of the community and, coming down with a heavy hand and saying, well, look, I am the enforcer. Because if you take that role always as the enforcer, so to speak, then, of course, you tend to draw that distance between yourself and the community. But then I agree with you fully in the sense that one must never be an apologist for doing one's job. If it is you are doing it properly and you are doing it in the right way and you are doing it within the ambit of the law and within reasonableness. So therefore, I think that distinction has to be clearly made. In other words, you basically have to have an iron fist in a velvet glove. So you use the velvet glove to, assuage the community to say, well, look, yes, I'm not being, unreasonable in my exercise of my duty, but it does not mean, on the other hand, that it's going to go the other way, that because I'm so apologizing to you, the community, that I am afraid to do my job. Because if that's the case, then that is definitely a case for a breakdown of all law and order.
And that is a matter of real concern, because there are many police officers who are actually afraid to do their job as a result of that. Because when they go out to do their job and they may get reprimanded, they got to do their job and they face this overwhelming opposition from scary looking people in the community. And I'm using the term scary looking deliberately, because if you had seen the video that ran over the weekend.
In the manner that Fazil used it.
Yes. Listen, if you had seen that video and the way the police officers were surrounded, it was almost like Black Hawk Down. You understand? And police officers are facing that every day, and there is no understanding at all by the population that when you see a police officer going about his business, if you are going to talk to him, it is to say, oh, you're looking for so-and-so, here's where they are. And you put an arrow with a red carpet guiding them along so that they could do their job. It is not to stop them from doing what they need to do and prevent them from law enforcement and protecting and serving the law-abiding population.
I accept that, Jessime, but there is another side to the scenario, because we have seen, and it's been recorded, documented, we have several cases that have been determined in our courts of police excesses and police abuses. So therefore, while, yes, I accept what you say there, Jessime, we have to remember that there may be certain persons who may have been victims or may have known of persons who have been victims of police excesses and police abuses. So therefore, as a result, their whole approach to police officers starts off being antagonistic based on the historical antecedents, and that we cannot discount or ignore or make light of, because unless and until you have actually been in such a scenario, you may not fully understand or appreciate what an ordinary citizen may feel. So it requires a balance on both sides, Jessime. And I certainly accept that, yes, members of the community have to, basically give that respect etc., to the police officers. But I certainly think that respect goes both ways. And the police officers themselves must, in turn, also respect the rights of citizens.
Ordinary citizens, Mr. George, you referred to that. I heard, and correct me if I misrepresented what I heard, that many of the crimes being committed have been linked to private licensed firearms by citizens. Was that a ploy or to dissuade applicants, or was that a valid reason that the commissioner has to in his is trying to dissuade people from applying for licensed firearm, or he's just looking for somebody to blame?
Well, it's not a matter of him trying to dissuade persons from applying for firearms. He has the final say, the final authority in that regard, and I think his policy is very clear in terms of how he intends to deal with that distribution of firearms, and it's a very conservative policy, and he has stuck by that regardless. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily linked to that statement. I think that has always been his policy and his approach, and I mean, he's entitled to take that view if it is that thinks it's justified.
But we said, I don't want to misquote the acting commissioner, but the majority or most of the crimes being committed is linked to the private firearms. When they did the forensic, as the case might be, it's linked to Mr. Jones down the street. Is that true?
Then, if that's the case, then he certainly ought to then be prosecuting those persons, because then certainly that has to be a breach of the terms of your license. So in such a circumstance, I think if it is that the commissioner has actually said that, then he needs to do more. He can't just make that statement in a vacuum. You need to then go further and say, well, look, as a result, we have arrested and charged, this number of persons who are actually holders of licensed firearms, and because of their abuse of the terms of the license, we've charged them. So I think that's where it needs to go. It can't just stop with a statement like that, if that statement was made.
So, Mr. George, what credence would you give to the charge by Senator Sturge that a lot of the crimes being committed in the country are done by police officers, are done by soldiers, as some sort of private army, as the case might be?
Well, the thing is, you see, statements like that, unless one backs it up with hard evidence, it's difficult to make any critical analysis or assessment of it. And I know the statement was made, but I can't recall seeing the statistical data or the empirical evidence to support that claim.
He was saying just the modus operandi alone suggests that these are professionals.
Well, I'm not doubting that. I'm not doubting that at all. But what I'm saying is that I would think that to make a conclusion in that regard, one would need a bit more evidence to support that claim.
Very encouraging.
And for me to comment, sensibly on it, I would need to see the raw data that is relied on.
One of the encouraging statements, I don't know if you saw the speech, by the interview rather, by the commissioner, acting commissioner. To me, one of the most encouraging statements was the fact, and I think it was his preamble, that the service is working assiduously to root out the rogue elements in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is, I love hearing those statements, but I think that it needs to be put into action a lot more. And quite frankly, I think there's a whole lot more that needs to be done, particularly when it comes to the internal disciplinary process within the police service. That is not functioning the way it ought to. I can tell you that for a fact. You have matters that are languishing for years and years and years, and that could not bode well for good management and organization of the police service. If it is that someone has committed a disciplinary offense, then their matter ought to be dealt with expeditiously, both for themselves and for the service, because it's not fair to the officer to be on a charge for years and years and you don't know the outcome, and it's just been delayed and dragged on unnecessarily. And it's not good for the service either, because first of all, this officer is on suspension, he's still receiving pay, You don't have the benefit of his service, and even for promotional, opportunities and stuff like that, you can't do anything because you have to wait till the outcome of this disciplinary charge. So I think that certainly there's a whole lot that needs to be revamped in terms of their internal disciplinary process. And I will repeat again the call that I make every time we have this discussion. There needs to be an internal affairs unit within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. It needs to be staffed by persons whom the normal police officers will not even know are internal affairs officers. They need to be out there in every station, noting, recording, basically observing what police officers are doing, and therefore you build your cases against rogue officers so that you can now prosecute them effectively and successfully. Unless you develop a proper internal affairs unit, you are not ever going to get to the root of the cancer of rogue officers within the service.
Martin George, thank you for your time this morning on the Breakfast Roundtable. We really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure and a wonderful day to you all.
Have a blessed day.
Edison Carr, Jesse May Venture, and Dr. Wayne Haywood on the Breakfast Roundtable on Sky 99.5 FM.